I am proud to welcome you to Dallas, first of all. I know many of you are in from out of town. And especially to what we consider one of our true gems in Dallas, and that's the Sixth Floor Museum. It is the most visited attraction that we have in our city. And interestingly, I was talking with one of the panelists earlier about how a couple of decades after the assassination, that the Convention and Visitors Bureau really didn't even track people coming to this area and coming to Dealey Plaza. And now to see what it has become 50 years later, I think is really remarkable. So we're proud to be here as a place for information, education, and experience. And we're glad to have you here, and we hope that you get an opportunity to see even more of Dallas while you're here, and what we really consider our Dallas of today, which is a remarkable city. Now, we have an esteemed panel this afternoon of the senior staff at the Sixth Floor Museum. And I'm first going to mention that Noelle LeVeaux, who is the executive director, has been held up in another session, and she will be joining us hopefully in just a little bit. And when she does, I will give you a little bit more about her bio. But directly to my right, we have Stephen Fagin, who is the associate curator here at the Sixth Floor Museum and the oral historian. And he has held that position since joining the staff in 2000. He has managed the institution's ongoing oral history project and has contributed to collections, exhibitions, education, and programming initiatives. He is the author of the recently published Assassination and Commemoration, JFK, Dallas, and the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza, which explores the long-term impact of the assassination of President Kennedy and details the history and development of the Sixth Floor Museum. To his right, we have Gary Mack, who is a curator. He is a Kennedy assassination researcher since 1975. Mack was actually a volunteer consultant to the Sixth Floor Museum during the planning stages in the late 1980s and was named the museum's full-time archivist in 1994. He was appointed curator in 2000. Most major print, network, and local news organizations have sought his expertise of the Kennedy assassination, including the Dallas Morning News, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, New York Times, Washington Post, the LA Times. He has been a consultant on many JFK documentaries and special reports. So we look forward to hearing what they have to say. I'm going to open with a couple of questions for both of them. And then if Noelle gets here, she will also have some opening remarks, and then we will open the floor to questions. So Stephen, I'm going to start with you. And I'm going to ask, what role do you believe the museum has played in Dallas's recovery from the assassination?
All right. Well, thank you very much for being here today. This museum's development is intrinsically linked to the collective memory of this city. In the immediate aftermath of the assassination, there was an effort to tear down this building, the Texas School Book Depository. There were 2 arson attempts on the building, one in the 1970s, one in the 1980s. And for many in Dallas, ashamed and frustrated by the popularity of Dealey Plaza as a gathering place for visitors to this city, the Texas School Book Depository building was a manifestation of evil. It was a painful reminder of these dark moments. And yet we fast forward today. The county purchased the building in 1977, converted the first 5 floors into county offices. Today it's the seat of Dallas County government. The top 2 floors are now the Sixth Floor Museum at Dealey Plaza. After a rocky 12-year period of development, this exhibition opened on President's Day in 1989. And what we see, if you compare this initial outcry to tear down the building to where the museum is today as an important part of the cultural landscape of Dallas, I think you get a sense of how this community has shifted from assassination to commemoration as we approach the 50th anniversary.
Thank you. Gary, I would like to ask you, how does the museum deal with the different theories around this subject of the JFK assassination?
Well, I was one of the original consultants to the museum project starting in the late 1980s, and I've been on board here full-time since 1994. One of the things we did not want to do was be the decider of what to think and what to know and not know about the Kennedy assassination. We were designed as a historical institution. Originally our name was the Sixth Floor Exhibit, now we're the Sixth Floor Museum. Our role is to tell the history, what happened in context, as far as anyone knows, and give our visitors the basic understanding of the Kennedy assassination subject. And if they want to learn more, there's plenty of information and misinformation out there.
Great, thank you. So I would now like to open the floor to questions. Does anyone have a question? I will repeat them if we don't have a microphone for you. Yes.
You know, one of the saving grace and constant curiosities is about the footage that exists. What is the general consensus about other footage existing, other photos existing that people, you know, took to their drugstore, had developed, and said, "I don't want to get involved," you know, and that there's more photographic proof out there somewhere. I mean, that's something that a lot of conspiracy people hang on to, saying at some point, you know, we'll get another angle. Is that a realistic assumption?
Absolutely, it is. In case you didn't hear it over there, he was wondering about other films and photographs that might be out there. One of the things that's happened many times, actually, is people will come in or they'll call and say, "I have a picture and it's not very good, and I wasn't in Dealey Plaza, it's just the motorcade and all." We're interested in all of those because they may answer a question someone asks in the future. Believe it or not, I had a call once from some guy who wanted to know the color of the sticker indicating the motorcade position or something like that. The sticker that was on the windshield of President Kennedy's car, and as I recall, it was yellow. And it was in the right corner. The only reason I remember that, or I was able to answer his question, was we happened to have a color photograph that was clear enough so that we could actually see this sticker that was on the windshield. The frustrating part here is that when pictures come in, we can often find folks in the background who have never come forward, and yet you can see cameras in their hands. We have a home movie that was filmed from the 4th floor of the depository, just 20, 25 feet away from where the rifle was being fired. And sure enough, right out there in the corner of Elm and Houston, you can see 2 people with cameras, both women. One apparently has a still camera by the way she's holding it, and the other has a movie camera. There's a telephoto lens, and she was running around the corner as she appeared briefly in this film. These women have never come forward. No pictures from those locations have ever surfaced. What else did they take? So all we can do is, you know, get the word out and say, folks, if you have something, please give us a call.
Great. Any other questions? We have a microphone, too, that can come to you if you have a question.
I have a question.
Here's one over here.
If you could tell me or discuss some of the ways that the city of Dallas changed culturally and politically as a direct result of the assassination.
So the way that the city has changed culturally and politically.
Well, I think we've seen certainly a shift in the makeup of the community. Of course, Dallas was known throughout the world after the assassination by this stigma, city of hate, which was undeserved because mainstream conservatism had long been Dallas's reality, but it was the activities of a fringe minority in the community, ultra right-wing extremists, that dominated the political image of Dallas in the years leading up to the assassination of President Kennedy. And we saw these isolated incidents. We saw Lyndon Johnson running for vice president during the 1960 presidential election, accosted on the streets of Dallas. And just a month before President Kennedy's visit, the United Nations ambassador, Adlai Stevenson, was hit on the head with a sign and spit on. And so after President Kennedy was killed, it was as if there was sort of a collective global sigh. Oh, Dallas. That's where things like this happen. The perception being that Dallas was a toxic environment where violence occurred. What we saw in the aftermath was the city taking stock of itself and immediately trying to shift that image. Concrete example of that is the mayor of Dallas, Earl Cabell, stepping down and running for the congressional seat held at that time by Bruce Alger, who was considered one of the most conservative congressmen in the United States. And Alger had been present when Lyndon Johnson and his wife were heckled on the streets of Dallas in the 1960 election. So we saw an effort by the city leaders to change the face of Dallas politics, provide more moderate leadership for Dallas. And also we saw a change in the community. The new mayor, Eric Johnson, launched a civic renewal project in November of 1964. called Goals for Dallas, and it was an opportunity for the Dallas community to come together and put forth ideas on how to improve the city through housing and welfare, health and human services and education. And the results of Goals for Dallas are still with us today. They're still visible all over this community, tied directly or indirectly to Goals for Dallas. You have DFW Airport, and you have the new City Hall complex, the J. Eric Johnson Public Library, even air conditioning for public school classrooms in Dallas. So we see this throughout the 1960s, and in 1970, Look magazine gives Dallas the All-America City Award, which is a far cry from the city of hate stigma that dominated the city's image in the immediate aftermath of the assassination.
It also helped that the Dallas Cowboys started winning. And the Dallas TV show. I mean, it's fun being Texan, but we don't all wear cowboy hats and drive pickup trucks and have gun racks and all that stuff. So we participate in that fun also. So it gave people something else to think about when the name Dallas comes to mind.
Other questions?
You're making this much too easy.
There's a
one
question in the
back
back here. Here she comes.
Why did you wait for so long until our celebration here in Dallas? I mean, not just the museum, but the city.
Stephen, you wrote a book about that, I think.
Well, Dallas, of course, struggled to find ways to commemorate this event, memorialize President Kennedy. As I mentioned earlier, in the immediate aftermath, we saw this desire to erase memories of the assassination, to ignore this event, which is why there was an effort to tear down this building. It took about 3 years for a small plaque to be installed in Dealey Plaza, actually recognizing the site as the site of the Kennedy assassination. And it was not until 1970 that Philip Johnson's John F. Kennedy Memorial was unveiled behind the old Red Courthouse. So we see this slow embrace. And again, I call it this journey from assassination to commemoration because it's about the city stepping away from this fear and anger and frustration and embracing this as a defining moment in American history which affected not just Dallas but the nation and the world. During the 12 years that it took this museum to be established, the founders, 2 women, a local preservation activist named Lyndalyn Adams and a historian from Virginia named Conover Hunt, these 2 women devoted about a decade of their lives to making the 6th floor exhibit a reality. And they battled a myriad of problems. They battled local and state preservation agencies. They battled Dallas Area Rapid Transit that at one time wanted to build a subway right through the grassy knoll that would forever detrimentally alter the makeup of the site. And there was a private development project that called for a parking garage to wrap around 2 sides of this building. And so there were all these efforts, Dallas moving forward, Dallas forgetting about the assassination, and this small grassroots network of individuals who stepped up and said, this is history, this needs to be preserved. And the 6th Floor Museum is a concrete realization of that.
And let me add one thing about theories from moments ago. This isn't my museum. These aren't Gary's theories. We just tell the history, but for all our exhibits and publications and videos and public programs and all, we've got to make sure we've got the facts straight. The latest theory, and you may have heard this already, is that the city scraped off the X's from the street out there. Since I've been here in 1994, I've seen the city scrape off Elm Street at least 3 times, and this might be the 4th time. I drive home on Elm Street every day, and because of where the road curves, the pavement gets pushed up into ruts. And what happens is the city just scrapes off the asphalt right down to the original brick from when the plaza was built back in the 30s, and they repave it. And the X is one of the victims, but I have no doubt the X will be back within days.
We have a couple more questions over here.
Another question is, do you ever reach out to the Kennedy family for any of the events, or is it something that it's too indelicate to do, or do they have a standing invitation to be part of any commemorations?
The Kennedy family our people know several members of the family, and they know us, and our directors talk on a somewhat regular basis. I first visited the Kennedy Library back around 1980. I think it was shortly before it was actually opened. And if you've been there since, they don't treat the assassination very much. I think there's just one hallway. They may be doing something different for the 50th, but this is not something they like to hear. They just don't want to deal with it. So once we were in place and have proven ourselves, they're thrilled to tell people, go talk to those sixth floor museum folks in Dallas. They can help you. So we're just really glad about that. Obviously, we get questions many times, people asking if any Kennedy family members have been here. Yes, they have, but we don't identify them. And sometimes, some of them, the distant family members, probably just walk in with everybody else because no one knows who they are. The only thing I can pass along is that my understanding is they pretty much have the same general questions and unease that not all the facts have been known, but they don't have any knowledge either. There's no evidence. I mean, I try to keep up with this stuff, and there are a lot of theories out there, and there are a lot of folks who are very good at interweaving information and presenting what looks like a solid picture, but if you really spend some time at this stuff, virtually all of it falls apart, but not all of it does. On the other hand, there are always holes in murder cases, and they can never be answered. So we tell the straight facts, and if history changes, I know we'll have a new exhibit to address it.
I'll just add to that briefly. During the development of this museum, input from the Kennedy family was not sought specifically out of respect for them. One of our founding board members, the museum is governed by an independent nonprofit foundation. One of our founding board members was a close friend of Senator Ted Kennedy, and she went to Washington, sat in his Senate office, and explained what the sixth floor exhibit was going to be about, how it was going to be designed, and why it was going to be here as a necessary component of Dealey Plaza because of the interest, the need to contextualize the event and provide some meaning for people visiting the site. And that was it. She continued to brief Senator Kennedy's aide and provide information about the exhibit throughout its development, but out of respect for the family, they were not involved in this because this is such a sensitive topic for them.
Through the years, I've had the occasion to talk with Jean Hill, the lady in red, as she's come to be known. She's now deceased. Her testimony and was so compelling as she would tell it. Did anything ever come of that was taken seriously, or was it just sort of summarily dismissed and ignored?
Jean Hill was the most interesting person. I knew her for several years. She was absolutely convinced where she was standing, which is essentially directly across the street from Abraham Zapruder. She was convinced that all of the shots, 4 to 6 in total, came from on the grassy knoll up by the fence. Not just some of the shots, all of the shots. And she said that for the rest of her life. The problem is that's where cops ran first. There are films and photographs showing a cop running, parking his bike on the curb at the base of the grassy knoll and running up the hill. And some of the witnesses thought that's where shots were coming from. They found nothing, either in that area or in the parking lot behind the fence. I was very fortunate in 1978 when, during the House Select Committee on Assassinations investigation was being undertaken, test shots were fired from the sniper's nest window and from behind the fence on the grassy knoll. I was in Dealey Plaza and on top of the Records Building and a couple other places. I understand exactly why some people thought shots were coming from different locations. It is a real echo chamber out there, depending on where you're standing. Maybe that's the simple answer.
Jean Hill was one of the earliest oral history participants in our ongoing oral history project at the museum. She was interviewed literally the month the exhibit opened, February of 1989. In the earliest days, this museum was actually not called a museum, it was called an exhibit or an exhibition, and it was not a collecting institution, which of course has changed. We now have about 45,000 objects in our collection, including this rich archive of oral history. People began arriving at the site as soon as this place opened with stories to share. And in that first year, Jean Hill and a couple of other eyewitnesses and reporters and even Jack Ruby's brother Earl came to the site with these rich narratives. And we simply borrowed tape recorders from Dallas County on the 5th floor. And we recorded a handful of these impromptu recollections, and that formed the basis for an ongoing oral history project which was formally established in 1992. And today we record the interviews on high-definition video. We have over 1,100 recordings in the collection, and we continue to record about 100 each year. And it's a rich archive of history that's made available to students, teachers, and researchers around the world, both on-site in our reading room and also via our website, jfk.org.
I know there were a couple of questions down here, it looked like.
So you've been talking about the facts, but what I would like to know is, what do you believe what happened on that day?
Okay, any other questions? I don't know. I mean, I was a senior in high school in Denver. I know what the official findings are. I know what some of the interesting conspiracy theories are and what some of the unanswered questions are, but I don't know what to think anymore. It's hard to place Lee Harvey Oswald with anyone else. I mean, he wasn't known as a great marksman. He wasn't known as a Kennedy hater. He wasn't known as much of anything. So why would you pick him to be your pal to kill the president? On the other hand, Oswald's rifle was found on the 6th floor at the opposite corner from where the 3 empty shells were found by the window. If there's a plot to frame Lee Harvey Oswald, how do you even begin to create a plot like that? How do you know he even has a gun, much less that it works? And how do you get him to bring a package to work, as it is known he did that day? And it's just, when you examine these things objectively, they can't work. They just cannot work. They're my 2 cents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The House Select Committee concluded that 4 shots were fired due to an audio tape, but I understand that afterwards, when the audio tape was re-examined, it doesn't say the same thing today. What is that situation with that kind of proof today, and how would you look into that today?
He's talking about a theory, and this is one that I take credit for good reasons and other. The Dallas Police Department radio broadcasts were recorded routinely. And when I heard a tape of those recordings back in 1976, I noticed, as others had, that someone had left his microphone on. You could hear this constant motorcycle engine noise for several minutes. And the thinking was that if someone had opened the microphone, that blocked communications between the motorcade and headquarters, which I thought was pretty clever. Pretty clever for a plot. My question, based, I think, from my radio background and journalism studies, I asked the simple question was, well, if someone opened their microphone, if he's in the motorcade, the shots must be on here too. This theory went to the House Assassinations Committee. They ultimately located what they believed were the original recordings. They had them analyzed, and test shots were fired to get a sound fingerprint in Dealey Plaza to compare with the noises that were on the recording. And they found that in 4 places they matched. That gave them the location of each gunshot and where the open microphone was at the moment each shot was fired. The microphone was traveling in the west lane of Houston Street and then the south lane of Elm Street. And the 4 shots, not 3, that appeared on the recording, shots 1, 2, and 4, were fired from the 6th floor window of the book depository. But the third of the 4 shots came from the grassy knoll. Based almost entirely on that evidence, the House Assassinations Committee concluded there was a probable conspiracy to kill President Kennedy. A year or two later, a rock musician in Ohio named Steve Barber, in listening to the same recording that I listened to, heard something that I didn't hear and no one else did either. It was the faint sound of a voice. He was able to pick out what that voice was saying. And it turns out that voice was the voice of Dallas County Sheriff Bill Decker ordering his men into the railroad yards to see what happened up there. It is known that Decker did not give that order until a minute after the assassination. And yet you heard his voice at the same moment the last shot was supposedly fired. Therefore, these impulses, which they thought were shots, could not possibly be shots. And with that realization, the National Academy of Sciences concluded there are no shots on this recording, which effectively terminated the House Select Committee on Assassination's finding of probable conspiracy. That's the short version.
Very interesting. Any other questions? Anyone wants to put out that last question? I think we have another one right here.
Understandably enough, the politicians of USA, I come from Norway, but they wouldn't say that there was a conspiracy. But we heard now in Norway on the 9th of November that John Kerry actually spoke out that there may have been some other people involved than just Lee Harvey Oswald. What would you say to such a statement?
My understanding of this was a conversation between Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and U.S. newsman Charlie Rose several months ago here in Dallas. I guess about almost a year ago now, where he really gave some insight into the thinking of at least some members of the Kennedy family. But basically what he was saying is, we think there's more to this, or some of us think there is more to this story than what we know. And I'd sure like to know what information he was paying attention to, because as I said, virtually all these conspiracy tales fall apart if you know all the sides of the story. The conspiracy writers are terrific at presenting one side of the story, but they don't tell you everything you need to know. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. can be fooled just as easily as any of you folks.
But this was John Kerry, not...
Oh, John Kerry. I thought, okay. I haven't heard the quote. I've heard about it. I don't know what the context was. You have to understand that the public opinion surveys that have been taken since, I believe, the weekend of the assassination show that most American adults just do not believe it was Lee Harvey Oswald alone. But ask them, raise your hand, how many have read the Warren Report? No one's read the Warren Report. Okay, 2 people in this room. 3 people. Most people have not read the Warren Report. They don't know the basic details. If you're going to play baseball, you have to learn the ground rules first. Most people don't do that. One of the theories recently was that a C-25 transport plane landed in the Trinity River bottoms over here and picked up a guy who was an identical twin of Lee Harvey Oswald and flew him to Roswell, New Mexico. I mean, seriously. That theory was in the book that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. thought was a terrific book. So, yeah. I'm without speech.
All right, we've got one more question, our last question right here in the middle.
Is it true that if people think that there was a conspiracy, that it could only be identified by if there was more than one shooter? Oswald, I don't believe he was the shooter, but he could have been the only shooter and put up to it by other people. It's almost as if people believe the only way to establish a conspiracy is to have more than one shooter, which is absurd. Any Sherlock Holmes follower would know you could have a single shooter but still have a conspiratorial operation.
Of course. The problem with Lee Harvey Oswald, among several, he wasn't hanging out with anybody. He didn't have any money, for one thing. And he had a minimum wage job, which was $1.25 an hour at that time. Some people try to tie Lee Harvey Oswald into Jack Ruby. Lee Harvey Oswald didn't drink. He was married. That's not to say, he didn't want to look at other women, but these are two individuals who could not be more different. Why would they hang out with each other? When you talk to people, for example, who knew Jack Ruby, this was a guy who fancied himself as a tough guy. He'd hand out club cards to anybody and everybody. He'd go where the action was to shake hands with people and get folks to come to his club. And every city's got a guy like that. Folks from other countries here, you've got folks like that where you live, where guys show up and they're always there, and you wonder, how the heck did he get here? What are you doing here, Jack? Jack, just stay out of the way. Otherwise, I'm going to have to kick you out. Maybe that's what happened in the basement of the police department. A cop might have seen him and said, Jack, you're not supposed to be here. Just get out of the way, and otherwise I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank you all for being here. We do really want you to learn more about Dallas if you can while you're here. So we do have some information on the back table. I would also like to point out that my staff is here who will absolutely answer any questions that you have and direct you anywhere that you want to go over your couple of days here with us. And I just want to thank the Sixth Floor Museum. We are hosting this together, the Dallas Convention and Visitors Bureau with the Sixth Floor Museum. And there are some other events here today. There's also a panel that's starting at 4 o'clock. With eyewitnesses. So hopefully you'll be back here for that. But thank you very much for being here. We appreciate it.